The garbage bag split before I even got it to the trunk. Not tore, split, right along the bottom seam, and a single sock fell out onto the wet driveway and just sat there in a puddle like it had given up too. Behind me, through the screen door, I could hear my sister laughing. Not at something else. At me. At the sound of my own life spilling out onto concrete at 11 at night. My brother-in-law said something I didn't catch, and she laughed harder. I picked up the sock. I didn't say anything back. I just stood there in my mother's driveway holding a wet sock, and I made myself a promise, quiet, almost embarrassed, like I didn't believe it yet myself. They will not get to see me like this again. This is what happened. My name is Renata. 19 months ago, none of this had happened yet. I had a life that would have looked, from the outside, completely unremarkable, which is exactly why I loved it. A coffee maker that took 4 minutes too long, and I never replaced it because the sound of it finishing was how I knew it was time to wake the kids. A minivan with a crack in the left tail light that I kept meaning to fix and never did. A junk drawer in the kitchen with 3 dead batteries, 3 working batteries, and no way to tell which was which without a flashlight I also couldn't find. It wasn't a good life because it was impressive. It was a good life because it was mine, and it was steady, and I didn't have to think about it too hard to know it would still be there tomorrow. I had 2 kids. Dara was 9, and she narrated everything out loud, including things that had already happened, like she was giving the world a second draft. Milo was 6, and he collected rocks he called specimens and lined them up on the windowsill in an order only he understood. And I had a husband, Theo. He wasn't a monster. That would have been easier. He was quiet in a way I used to think was calm and later understood was just absence. He remembered my coffee order and forgot my birthday 2 years running. He was the kind of man people described as a good guy at parties, meaning nothing bad and also meaning nothing much at all. The end of it came fast, and I'm not going to walk you through every hour of it. There was a phone that stayed face down on the counter for months before I finally picked it up. There was a name I didn't recognize and then recognized too well. There was a conversation that lasted 11 minutes and ended my marriage in language so calm it almost felt polite. I won't describe what those 11 minutes did to the inside of my chest. Some pain is too specific to hand to someone else. I'll just tell you that by the end of that week, I had 2 kids, 1 minivan, and nowhere that was mine to bring them home to. So I did what you do. I called the people who were supposed to catch me. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, already sighing before I'd said more than 4 sentences. Renata, I love you, but I raised 4 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment and I never once called anyone crying about it. She said it like an inheritance she was proud of, like suffering quietly was a family heirloom I'd failed to accept gracefully. I sat on the edge of Milo's bed while she talked, one hand flat on his blanket, feeling the shape of his knee underneath it, and I said okay. Just that. Okay. My sister, the one who laughed in the driveway, didn't laugh on the phone. She did something worse. She went quiet for 4 full seconds and then said, God, Renata, again? You always do this. Turn into the emergency. Not, I'm sorry this happened to you. Again. As if my life ending was a scheduling inconvenience she'd seen coming. I looked down at the phone charger cord wrapped twice around my hand, tight enough to leave a line, and I didn't argue. I just uncoiled it slowly and said I understood. My uncle, the one who'd always called himself the practical one in the family, listened to the whole thing and then told me, gently, like he was doing me a favor, that maybe if I'd paid more attention at home instead of always being on that phone, none of this would have happened. He said it while looking at his own phone. I remember a bird landing on the porch railing behind him on the video call, small and unbothered, and I focused on that instead of his face for a second, because it was easier. And my father gave me the lecture. The one about resilience, about how his generation didn't have therapists, they had jobs, delivered like a gift he expected me to unwrap gratefully on the spot. Sitting in my car in a parking lot with both kids asleep in the back seat and the heater running because I was scared to turn the engine off in case it didn't start again. For people. For different flavors of no. Not one hand actually offered. Just a driveway, a phone cord, a bird on a railing, an engine I was afraid to turn off. I'm going to skip over the ugly middle part. Not because it isn't important, but because some of it isn't mine to perform for anyone. I'll tell you 3 things and then I'll move on. I'll tell you that for 6 weeks, home was a room with a mini fridge that hummed too loud and a bedspread with a cigarette burn shaped like a comma. I'll tell you that I learned exactly how far $340 stretches when it has to stretch across 2 children and 1 adult who has stopped counting herself as a priority. And I'll tell you that there is a specific sound a 6-year-old makes when he asks, very quietly, if you're going to be okay, and that sound rearranged something in me permanently. The rebuild didn't start with a miracle. It started with a woman named Priscilla, who ran the front desk at a logistics company I'd applied to out of pure momentum, no real hope attached. She didn't hug me. She didn't tell me it would be fine. She looked at my resume, tapped it twice with 1 finger, and said, "You're better than filing. Come in Monday, I'll show you the dispatch side." That was it. No pity. Just a door held open exactly wide enough for me to walk through it myself. 3 months in, dispatch became scheduling. Scheduling became a raise I didn't ask for, because Priscilla noticed things before I said them out loud, which was a kind of care I hadn't been offered in longer than I wanted to admit. I started keeping a folder, an actual physical folder, blue, slightly bent at one corner, with every pay stub, every email, every scrap of proof that this version of my life was real and documented and mine. We moved into a 2-bedroom the following spring. Small. The radiator clanked at odd hours, and I never fixed it because the sound became familiar in the good way instead of the bad way. Dara picked the paint color for her room herself, a yellow the hardware store called Meadow, though it looked more like a dandelion having a very good day, and she painted 1 wall herself, badly, with visible brush strokes she refused to let me smooth over. Milo lined his specimens up on a new windowsill, in the same unexplainable order, and something about seeing those rocks resettle into their old formation told me, more than any pay stub could, that we had actually landed somewhere. The legal side of things wasn't dramatic either. There was no courtroom scene where anyone gasped. There was a folder of receipts, a custody arrangement built on documented pickup times and school emails, and a calendar app one updated obsessively, and a mediator who looked mostly bored through most of it because the case, in her words, documents itself. Theo got the custody schedule the paperwork actually supported, not the one either of us felt entitled to. It wasn't a victory with a soundtrack. It was a Tuesday and some signatures and a version of fairness that looked administrative, because that's what fairness usually looks like when nobody's performing for an audience. Word travels strangely in families. Nobody calls to check on you when you're in a motel room with a comma-shaped burn on the bedspread. But somehow, everyone finds out the exact week you buy a house. My mother called first, and her voice had a warmth in it I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "I always knew you'd land on your feet," she said, like she'd been rooting for me from a front row seat the entire time instead of a phone 3 states away telling me to suffer quietly like she had. I let her talk. I didn't correct her account of history. I just said, "That's nice, Mom," and left it there, flat, unargued. My sister sent a message 4 paragraphs long, apologizing for how things came across, using the word misunderstood twice, and ending with a request to see the kids, whenever works for you, no pressure. I read it twice. I didn't answer for 6 days, and when I did, I answered in 3 sentences, none of them cruel, none of them warm either. My uncle never said a word. Not one. He liked a single photo I'd posted of the new porch, a thumbs up, nothing more, as if a thumbs up could retroactively stand in for the 4 seconds of silence he'd once given me instead of comfort. My father sent a card. An actual paper card, generic, the kind with a lighthouse on the front. No note beyond his signature and the words, "Proud of you, kid." No mention of the parking lot. No mention of the lecture. Just a lighthouse and 4 words, sitting on my counter for a week before I decided what shelf to put it on. I didn't rush any of it. I want to be clear about that. I answered when I was ready, at the pace I chose, and not 1 second before. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a debt you owe on someone else's schedule just because they've finally noticed you're doing well. It was Dara who gave me the moment I didn't know I needed. She came home from school with a project, someone I admire, and stood in the kitchen reading it out loud before I could even sit down properly. She'd written about a woman who kept going even when nobody helped her and built a whole new house out of just doing the next right thing, one boring Tuesday at a time. She hadn't used my name. She didn't need to. She looked up after reading it and asked, completely unbothered, if boring Tuesdays counted as brave. I told her they might be the only kind that do. I'm not telling you this story, so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm long past needing that, and honestly, I never wanted it. Not even in the motel room. Not even in the parking lot with the heater running. I'm telling this to the person who is, right now, standing in some version of that driveway, holding something that just split open, listening to someone laugh who is supposed to love them instead. Here's what I'd tell her. The people who are supposed to catch you don't always show up, and that's not a verdict on whether you deserve to be caught. Sometimes the only hand available is your own, and it turns out that's enough more often than anyone warns you. So tell me, has this happened to you? Has your family shown up late, only after your life looked good enough to take credit for? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you take nothing else from this, the people who laugh at your worst moment rarely get invited to your best one, and that's not bitterness. That's just how the story tends to end.